This project is an AHRC and EPSRC funded immersive experiences project called A Sense of Place, exploring nature and wellbeing through the non-visual senses. We have a very strong association between nature and wellbeing, and a lot of that association is often described in terms of green spaces and blue spaces, and it's fundamentally very visual. So, for example, when you are in a hospital and they bring nature into the hospital, it's often in the form of an image of a natural environment. And we wanted to explore the non-visual senses and the role that they play in people's well-being.
So I do have some problems with the term well-being, even though we're using it a lot for this project, because historically it does seem to be a word that people use around things like policies. In the 19th century, people talk about parks and well-being. What they're talking about is people having economic well-being, prosperity. They're kind of tying it in with other ideas. But there's not necessarily a clear sense of what well-being means. But I think when you ask people how they feel in themselves, it's kind of a word that's quite useful, that people can pinpoint their own emotions with.
We lean a lot on the visual. It's our kind of dominant sense. In a way, it's not about adding those senses because they're always there, but about making people pay more attention to them and to think more about the emotional aspects of sound, smell, which they have, but perhaps we don't recognise enough. So the first stage of the project is crowdsourcing, where we gather data from a range of people across Bristol, different ages, some people who have a lot of access to nature, some people who struggle to access nature, and get their responses. What smells, sounds do they like? What memories do they have of places they've enjoyed being in? The second stage is making something from those responses. So making some smells, making some soundscapes, thinking about how we might push towards some of the more interesting answers, but also co-produce with those groups the things they want.
From my own personal interest or my personal research perspective on this, I'm really interested in interrogating this idea of the relationship between well-being and landscape. So I'm a landscape researcher, and I try to understand what it is that people perhaps associate with different kinds of landscapes. So I'm really interested in doing that through sound rather than visual. There's been a limited amount of research to date that actually interrogates our sense of smell, our sense of hearing in relation to well-being. So I think that's kind of one of the really interesting components of this project.
My role in the project is taking care of the scent and the smell experience of it. I represent a company in the Netherlands, a scent company that produces a huge variety of scent, including scent systems that spread that specific scent for all kinds of purposes, whether it's hotels, wellness center, shops, or these kind of projects. Because we think that a certain scent might evoke a certain emotion, or at least have a certain impact or influence on well-being.
Just because we can with technology doesn't necessarily mean we should. And so it's understanding those users and working out what do people really want and what the technology can be used for to really help people and make their well-being better.
So there's lots of kind of academic thought and consideration that's kind of going into what is well-being, how do we talk about it, how do we write about it, what does it historically mean, all those kind of things, how does it impact the hospital environment. It's kind of my role to take all of that and turn it into something for people to physically experience.
We've had two groups of people go through our immersive experience, and then we've got feedback from them after each one. So they've gone through 3 rooms. One is a beach soundscape, one is a fantasy soundscape, and one is a green spaces soundscape.
I enjoyed the kind of the haptic, the sense of touch, both the breeze at the beach, the grass beneath my feet, in the forest. And I thought both of those experiences really kind of gave me a sense of freedom, of moving away from the situation I was in and going somewhere else, wherever that might be.
I could hear the sound of the stream, and then I could feel something was touching my legs. So just felt really good. Yeah.
I really enjoyed being a guinea pig in the experience. From a therapeutic point of view, it could be a useful distraction, but really I think from a therapeutic point of view, where the magic comes is the care of the individual artist creating an individual experience for an individual recipient.
Yeah, in my mind it was real. I felt like I was in a waterfall, I felt like I was in the beach and there was a storm. I felt the blue sky, so yeah. I felt I was in the forest, which I didn't really like.
I was really surprised by how relaxing the experience was when you take away the sense of sight in a couple of the experiences, but in another one, I found that actually I really wanted to see what was going on around me, and I wondered whether the visual sense there might have enhanced my sense of kind of well-being and escapism, I guess, from the situation I was in.
We've got feedback from everyone after each room, and it's been really interesting because we've had completely different feedback so far from everyone who's gone through it. It means we have to think more about how to design these kinds of experiences in ways that give people choice.
Feedback has been varied, which is great. That's kind of ideal. We've had the breadth of the spectrum, people finding it exactly like what they would want, and people finding it really confronting and exactly the opposite of what they would want. But it's drawing up all kinds of questions of what does it mean for things to be synthetic and for you to know that they're synthetic. Does that make you feel cared for?
The end goal at this stage is to feed this into, I guess, a kind of prototype of something that can be adapted to different people's ideas of nature and well-being.